Well, welcome to the ICF Maryland webinar titled Becoming a Color Conscious Coach. I've actually had the pleasure over the last week of talking with Tamara, and you are going to find this webinar to be intriguing, I think powerful, and thought-provoking. A couple of housekeeping items. You are all muted. You will be able to certainly unmute yourself as you have questions, comments, and want to interact with each other. There also is the microphone at the bottom of your screen that will allow you to do that. There's also the chat box, which I see many of you already using. Please feel free to enter questions there, post comments. I will certainly be watching that throughout the webinar, and we'll be able to address questions to Tamara as we go through. Couple of other things, and I just noticed this, so we're going to just do some impromptu. I just noticed that unfortunately it doesn't look like we have the breakout options on this particular webinar. So we'll do some impromptu things, and we'll certainly get you all engaged and talking with Tamara and with each other. We are recording this, and as Tamara and I were talking, we certainly want everyone to be open, honest, transparent, ask any questions, and offer comments that you would like. And if you do not want your comments to be recorded, then certainly you can put them in the chat box. Or if we get to a point and we are all in agreement that we would prefer it not to be recorded, then I can certainly turn the recording off. The recording will be available to all of you, and when we do send out the evaluations along with the CCE information, we can certainly also send the link to the recording. So I would like to introduce you to Tamara. Many of you received an email yesterday, so those of you who had registered prior to yesterday morning. Tamara had included some information about herself, some links, some additional information for all of you. If for some reason you didn't receive that, you can certainly send an email to ICF, and we can make sure that you receive that as well. So Tamara actually created history in August of 2018 by becoming the first Black woman in the world to be inducted into the Toastmasters Hall of Fame as an accredited speaker. So out of 366,000 Toastmasters worldwide in over 146 countries, only 81 of them are accredited speakers. So we have one of those 81 with us today. Tamara uses her global platform to help individuals, teams, and organizations to build bridges across differences. She is a lifelong learner who has lived 7 years in Germany and experienced being an immigrant with limited language proficiency. She returned to school at the age of 65 to study race, identity, and conflict. Inspired by the election of 2016, Tamara convenes conversations on race and has built her coaching practice on helping marginalized executives find their voice in turbulent workspaces. Her recent trip, I believe in December, to Rwanda affirmed her quest to open conversations on color-conscious coaching. And Tamara will certainly tell us all about that. So please help me in welcoming Tamara. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate being here. And this is, as I was very transparent with Lori, this is the first time that I'm trying to do this in an hour and a half or an hour and 20 minutes when we think about the questions. I am going to give you a little bit of my story, and then I'm going to share with you how all of this came to be. I'm from South Central Los Angeles. Many of you may know that by my bio. And so I have come up through the turbulence of the 60s. The beautiful thing about that particular background is that I've studied race, it seems like, all of my life. It is part of my DNA. But I've also studied how to build bridges across differences as a part of that journey. I spent a week on top of a mountain in 1968 and 1969 with students from all over the country from many different backgrounds. And if any of you out there are alumni of the Brotherhood Anytown experience, then you know what this means. It was sponsored by the National Council of Christians and Jews, and we were given the opportunity to create the utopian world as 16 and 17-year-olds. But it also put us in those circles where we talked about our stereotypes, our differences, our fears, our biases. We didn't have the language that we have today, and so we did the best that we could. A few of those people became lifelong friends for me. I have always been a person who's been trying to be a citizen of the world. And this is important to understand in context of what I'm going to try to do today. When I had the opportunity to go to the high school in my neighborhood, my father decided that you need to be around some white people. Now, these are his words. I'm taking you into the kitchen table of a Black family in 1967. He said, you need to be around some white people. My neighborhood was about 98% Black and only 2% Hispanic. Today, it's about 30% Black and about 60% Hispanic. So I'm very happy that I had that exposure as a child, as a young person coming up. My father was a visionary because he said this world is going to be very multicultural. We didn't even have the word diversity in those days. And his goal was that I would be a citizen of the world, that I would travel, that our living room would look like the United Nations. He was very progressive for a man who was raised in Montgomery, Alabama in the segregated South. He was a worker for the Civil Rights Movement. He was a driver for the bus boycott movement. We were members of Dexter Avenue Baptist Church in Montgomery, the Church of Martin Luther King. My parents stood in the front yard when his home was firebombed. And so that is the context of my upbringing. In 1959, 1960, at the end of the movement, he decided that we would leave the segregated South on a segregated train and venture like 6 million people away from Jim Crow. But it was already something in me that said, you need to try to build bridges. And that's what I've done most of my life. I've been a leadership coach. I was trained by Terry Belf. Thank you very much, Terry, and many others along the way. I dabbled in leadership a long time, and then I realized that there was something missing around the leadership that I was doing in terms of executive coaching and onboarding executives, because now more and more people were referring their clients to me, clients that in any other circumstance they would have handled, except that the client was Black, the client was an executive, and sometimes the client was a woman. And so coaches were saying, I think you would be better suited. And I didn't question it because I was beginning my practice and I wanted as much experience as I could handle. It became an area of expertise for me because I was also a Black woman, an executive, and having some difficult times in terms of getting my voice heard in the upper echelons of my organization, which was the National Education Association. So we come to today, and as more and more business was coming my way, I started to ask my colleagues, are you interested in learning how to handle these clients yourself? Now, there are people who handle multicultural clients across the board. However, what was missing sometimes was gearing the client or asking the questions that the client might open up and talk about race as a contributor to whatever stress or challenges that were on the job. So I began to test whether or not, if I started to look at the same set of powerful questions, might I elicit a deeper exploration of the client. But the first thing I had to do was a deeper exploration of myself. And therefore I enrolled in George Mason at the School of Conflict Analysis and Resolution at the age of 65 and became a graduate student all over again, very much like moving to Germany to see what is it like to be a super minority, in an area, a super minority, where not only am I a racial minority, but I don't know the language and I don't know the culture, and I'm living in a village of 3,500 people. I lived there for 3 years and then moved to a village of 1,000, and was able to understand after a while to speak German, to understand the culture, and to know what to say and how to say it, and when to be completely quiet. So what I've done today is put together a quick overview of what I have learned, especially when it comes to the power of stories and the narratives that we create in our own head that says, maybe this is not the client for me. What I have heard from my own clients, one who was a director of human resources and then was promoted to the C-suite, she came to me as a result of the Pro Inspire program that Monisha Capella runs, and many of us at ICF know her and the work that she's doing. And this person gave a testimony that said, you helped me to find my big girl voice in that boardroom, because she had been sitting silently, because being the only African-American woman in the C-suite now appeared to people who had been her supervisors, she didn't know how to handle herself. And I asked the question, could race be a factor? Could your race be a factor in you not being able to find your voice? It opened up the question, and then it opened up a deeper conversation. So now I'm getting more and more, mostly women who are Black, who are in executive and managerial positions, where people in the organization will tell me, well, she's not approachable. It's hard to get to know her. They will assign these women coaches, not because the woman asked for a coach, but they're trying to figure out how to communicate. And what they've done is projected that there is something with my client that needs to be adjusted. What people who are not in a minority position, and I'm speaking today, I know we talk about color, but my expertise is in African Americans, and I want to be very clear about that. We tend to lump people of color. Well, I just had an example yesterday why I steer away from trying to position myself as someone who's an authority on people of color. I was in a meeting with people who were from Korea. It was with the George Mason campus. And the woman gave an example of cultural differences with Koreans. And it was so mind-opening for me that I just put a check that said, you need to study more about people from Asian cultures, not just Korea or Japan, because they are all different. So when we put people as people of color, I think we do a disservice. I'm not sure how we get around that, but I can tell you this. If you want to know more about African Americans in the workplace, especially from where I have had a catbird seat, then this is a good webinar for you today. I don't profess that you'll get everything that you need, but what I will do is say, if your knowledge is about like this, maybe it'll be about like this when we finish. I'm going to bring up a PowerPoint, and Lori, please guide me on what I need to do. Can my screen be seen? Lori?
You need to share it.
Okay, and guide me through that again.
You should be seeing that you can
share. I'm hitting the share button.
Yeah.
And then there's the share. And then I'm going to get away my old stuff. Get away that. And where do I get my PowerPoint? Down here at the bottom. Now.
There it is.
Okay. I'm going to assume that everybody can see this and follow along. The reason I put the PowerPoint together is just so I can stay on time, so that we'll have time for questions and answers at the end. Now, the wisdom from R.D. Laing. I'm not sure if my picture over here in the front is blocking. Maybe we'll hide that, yes. Many of us who went through the Georgetown program will remember this from our very first class, and it's all about noticing. I'd like for you to just take time to read that yourself. My point of view is that when it comes to being able to coach people of color, particularly African Americans, then we have to realize, what is it that we're not noticing? What is it that we might be doing in our practice, in the way that we're asking questions, that could be tweaked just a little bit in order for different groups of people to will be able to go deeper in what we're trying to do. I want to show you this quick video, and many of you have seen this, but it underscores why this whole thing about color is so important. A lot of this began when my colleagues would say, well, I don't see color. And many of you on the call may say, I don't see color. Well, there needs to be an attitude adjustment around that, because we're in such a colorful world. As we look at how our neighborhoods are changing, our schools are changing, and I sent you the PDF from William H. Fry, who's a demographer with the Brookings Institution. And he has a wonderful book called The Diversity Explosion. He's got 2 versions of it, so if you do go out and get that book, you're looking for the 2018 edition. But he has everything we ever wanted to know about why we should be focused in on color, because the millennials of the future will be the minority will be the majority. And so as we see the white population declining, and we see more and more people of color not only coming into the country, but just the birth rates. I know in my town of Reston, there are apartments, little apartments going up all over the place, because they know that there's a new generation that's getting ready to come up into the world, and they are preparing for it. And so let's look at what just one company has done around color.
Come along, catch a heffalump. Sit with me on a muddy clump. We'll sing a song of days gone by. Run along now, don't be glum. Get you gone now, have some fun. Don't be long for the end is nigh. Come along now. Run away from the humdrum. We'll go to a place that is safe from greed, anger, and boredom. We'll dance and sing till sundown and feast with abandon. We'll sleep when the morning comes and we'll rise by the sound of the birds' song. Come along now. Run away from the humdrum. We'll sleep when the morning comes and we'll rise by the sound of the birds' song.
Okay, let's see. How do I get back here, Terry?
If you can just go back, there you go.
Thank you. So before let's just take a pause real quick. And that's Apple, but Apple is talking about making way for color. Watch the Super Bowl commercials this weekend and notice where you see more emphasis on color, especially we've always seen it with Coca-Cola in terms of trying to unite the world with a single Coke. But think about, what did you notice in that, and what message is Apple trying to project other than to just have us buy another iPhone? These are the questions that I ask that you ponder when this program was first announced. And so let's just take another view of them. And when you look at those 5 questions, if you printed this out or put a check mark, or which one, again, these are rhetorical questions, which ones jumped out for you so that you wanted to be on the call today? The one that stands out for me is, are you hesitant to name the racial elephant in the room? I have found this to be the biggest challenge with the executives that I work with, whether they are Black, white, no matter their ethnicity. It's naming the racial elephant in the room. people are sometimes reluctant to talk about race, and I'm making the assumption based on conversations with my colleagues who are different from me, where we have these crucial conversations over lunch or over email, is that people don't want to be misunderstood. Many times, if you come from a personality type where you need to be the one who has all the information, or you need to feel empowered that you are the leader, sometimes being vulnerable to know that you don't know and to be consciously incompetent is better than being unconsciously incompetent. And I'll repeat that. To be consciously incompetent, which means that you know that you don't know, that there's some growing that you need to do, is better than being unconsciously incompetent, which means that you will make mistakes and you're not even aware of the mistakes. Because sometimes there are people, depending upon what position you occupy in a relationship, that just won't love you enough to tell you when you're making mistakes. Fortunately for me, when I was coming up in my career, I had people who cared enough about me so that when I made mistakes, they would pull me aside and sometimes do it publicly, because I was in a very intense 4-week internship that was like the old school sensitivity training around race and differences. Some of you may have gone to a National Training Laboratories, one of their human interaction labs, and I sat in one of those where I made some mistakes around race. And there were people who called me on it, and I grew from it. Look at those questions and think about which ones resonate with you. But the one that I think I want to zero in on as we go through this, that guides this webinar, is being able to name the racial elephant in the room. The objectives are very, very short in terms to explore. And I use explore on purpose because we're not after solution. You don't become competent in one webinar, but after a few, you may feel more competent and more comfortable. Maybe even after today, I would challenge you to just try some of the things that I will suggest. And then to examine the impact of our stories, our personal narratives. And then I'm pulling that word rumble from Brene Brown's, her latest book, to rumble with new behaviors. I looked up that word rumble because rumble to me was the rumble in the jungle when Muhammad Ali and George Foreman had the big fight. But a rumble, that kind of low noise, almost like a thunder, but it's on the inside of us. But when we rumble with something, we try to work it out. And so what are the new behaviors that you might try as a result of today? The takeaways that I want you to think about is knowing your own story. Many of us think we know our story, but then I'm going to put a twist on it. What is your story around race? What is your story around race? How do you seek to understand when it comes to race? How are you vulnerable? How do you ask questions? How do you demonstrate sensitivity? And to what extent do you study the other? And I should put other in quotes because when I talk about the other, I'm just talking about people who are different from you. It doesn't always have to be race. It could be someone who's of a different sexual orientation. It could be someone of a different gender, someone of a different nation, or of a different religion. And then how do you seek support? One, you know someone like me, but then there are many people like me if you just go a little bit deeper and find out who they are and what they know and what they're willing to share. Let's go with story.
And Tamara, just a couple of things that have come in through the chat box is people are saying, you know, the ability to discuss the undiscussable is what they're interested in. And also just the kind of concern about saying something wrong and perhaps even inadvertently offending or shutting someone down in the conversation.
And please make sure you remind me of that, because the undiscussable is really what's at the core of this and how we do it. And I put in these coaching competencies. We probably could hit a whole bunch along the way, creating awareness, co-creating actions, active listening and powerful questions. I want to get through this part because I do want to open it up for some conversation as well. This is also based around a short research project that I did around the racial divide in America. And my question in this big group project was question 8. And that question was, is America more or less dangerous for minorities now, post-election 2016? And most people thought that there are minorities everywhere, that there's more danger for people of color, particularly African Americans, particularly African American men, as we see on the TV at least monthly. These were some of the themes that came out of the interviews with 64 people ranging from age 27 to 81. And then we interviewed all racial groups and we included immigrants. Some of the other questions that came up, because all of this goes around the differences that we're seeing in the workplace. We're seeing more people who are immigrants. We're seeing more people from the Muslim community. And then we are asking, is America more or less dangerous? Because this is important, because these people come to work and some of these people become your clients. And if they're coming to the coaching relationship and you're not asking the questions that might bring up some of those things that are deeper behind whether or not they're accepted by their peers at work, but what is it about the whole person that you might get at as a result of being a coach? So the power of story and identity. I want to just bring up one example, and this comes from the book Whistling Vivaldi, and there will be a list of resources that Lori will send to you. But he talks about stereotype identities and the fact that some of us create stories where we buy into the stereotype that other people have placed upon us. So if you happen to be white and you happen to be in a situation where race is being discussed, some white people, I'm never going to say all, but some white people might be reluctant to join into the conversation simply because they've created a story that they're not qualified, they're not competent. And I have engaged in many conversations where I didn't feel qualified or I didn't feel competent, but I knew how to ask the question. If you know how to ask the question and you have gotten in touch with your own identity, and all of us are carrying around multiple identities, and you're not letting those identities clash. My identity as a Black woman, I'm a part of several groups. So there's my group identity as a woman, there's my group identity as a Black woman, but then there's also my personal identity as Tamara Hamilton. And I have to be very, very secure in my personal identity so that when I hear someone talk about the angry Black woman, my blood pressure is not going to rise, because I know I am not, that's my group identity, but it does not impact my personal identity. Now, we're going to do an activity very quickly, and after this activity, I'm going to open it up just a little bit. So here is my I Am poem, and I wrote it out last night, and I want all of you to try this. So take out a piece of paper, and this goes into getting in touch with your own identity, multiple identities. I do this with my clients. I've done it with large group interventions when I really wanted to bond the group quickly. And so and this is where we wanted to go into breakout groups so that you could be in groups of 8 or 10 and share a couple of your I Am poems. But here's mine. The I Am poem is designed to make connections across differences. If you have a group and you're going to be with that group, whether it's 2 hours or a whole day, if you start with an I Am poem, we start to get at our multiple identities. So I am the descendant of enslaved people from the west coast of Africa. I am the daughter of Meso and Viney Smiley of segregated Montgomery, Alabama. I could not try on clothes, or I am the girl. Each sentence starts with I am. I am the girl who could not try on clothes or shoes until I migrated to California at 5 years old. I am one of 6 million who left the segregated South on a segregated train heading away from Jim Crow. I am embracing many identities: Black woman, mother, grandmother, poet, coach, and peace builder. I'm comfortable with the pronouns she, her, hers. I am a champion of forgiveness and reconciliation. I am a bridge builder across differences. I am excited to be of service to my fellow coaches. What I would like you to do is think about, what did you notice about my identity? How you know me better as a result of just less than a minute of an I am poem. And now I would like for you, or invite you, to write your own. You're going to stay between 7 and 10 sentences, no more than 10. No more than 10. And then we're going to come back. So if we could just take a moment for you to craft your I am poem. Yes, you can see mine was a total of 9 sentences. And for some of us, we'll get started, but we may not finish. So in the interest of time, Lori, I'm going to stop sharing the screen for a moment, and I'm going to leave it up to you to guide us in terms of helping me to figure out how to stop the share and then come back to the group.
You just did. What I have asked in the chat box is if anyone wanted to share what they've written, to please do that. So there are some that are starting. I know, Tamara, when you and I were talking over the last couple of days, I had some time to think about mine. And I think mine is certainly different than yours. But if you didn't mind, I thought I would kind of share mine to get us going a little bit too.
Yes, break the ice, please.
I put, I'm a powerful white 57-year-old woman. I am a dedicated and resourceful wife for 30 years to my husband, Ross. I'm an engaged, proud, and loving mother to my son, Dante, who's 23 and a new cardiac nurse. I'm the eldest sister to my 3 siblings who keep our family connected, especially since my parents died a little over 5 years ago. I'm a leadership coach and an organizational consultant and trainer who empowers others to identify and develop their core purpose and to co-create with them the life by design in alignment with their purpose and their talents. And I'm a lifelong learner on a journey to be connected to others and to connect other people in order to bring harmony to the world.
Well, thank you so much. And can I share something with the audience?
Absolutely.
When we did this last night, Lori did not say, I'm a white woman. She didn't. So why should that part of the identity not be expressed? Because that's who you are. That's who you are. And so I'm looking at the chat, and I gotta keep the tears back here because it's so beautiful. Mark says, I'm a writer, policy analyst, coach, leader, tennis player, mother, cook, baker. I mean, these are beautiful. I hope there's some way we can share with one another by saving these and sending them out. The elephant in the room, when we are grounded in our multiple identities, then we have to stand in our own personal power to face that elephant in the room. I have faced many, many elephants in the room. I have made myself vulnerable. I have been hurt. But now that I have, acquired this graying hair and 30 years of experience, I've lost parents, I've lost, friends, and I've gone through all of the life challenges that people can go through. What I do understand about me is that I have a positive intent. If you are grounded in your values and you know that the question that you're about to put into that room, that elephant that you're about to name, lean back on what you already know, which is how we ask questions. We don't barrel the questions out. We study how to ask questions. We practice how to ask questions. Get a learning partner, preferably someone different from yourself, and practice asking the question so that you get the feedback that you need. I remember I didn't know how to ask people, where are you from? Because I realized a long time ago that was offensive to ask somebody, where are you from? Because I heard an accent. Because when I asked that in my workplace, where someone was from, the person said, I'm from Boston. It's just that the accent was still heavy Cambodian, but had been in Boston for 30 years. So sometimes I'll frame my question by saying, what is that beautiful accent I'm hearing? And then the person will smile and say Nigeria, or name the country. And then we can get ease into a conversation without me saying, where are you from? With these undiscussables, we have to figure out who said that they're undiscussable and what judgment are we acquiring from someone else. If I'm facilitating in a room and I see something, because I go between being a coach and a facilitator. And these days, my work is more in the area of facilitation, and then that leads into perhaps a coaching contract. But I'm now called in primarily as a facilitator, and that's all been since election 2016. But when I see something happening in a room, especially if I see where one person has cut off another person or disrespected another person, I call time out. And then I try to frame a question so that it comes off as one of curiosity and never one of blame or finger pointing. But I would like someone to give an example of what you would see would be an undiscussable where you might want to intervene. Does someone want to raise a hand on that? Sue McLeod. Sue, can we unmute the mic and let Sue come in? Lori?
Yes, just a second.
Okay. So Sue McLeod. Okay. Hi, Sue, how are you?
I'm good, Tamara. How are you?
Just fine, thank you.
So here's what I thought was an undiscussable. When I was coaching a woman who she was from Central America. She was working with an African American and an Asian woman. And it just struck me that there are different approaches to things might be based on where they came from. But I didn't know how to bring that up in coaching her.
So she's working with an African American woman.
No, Central American.
She's from Central America, and who is she working with?
She had employees from African American and from Asia.
And what was her goal of coaching? And what was she?
She was trying to be a better supervisor, to delegate more, hold people accountable. And it was clear she got along better with the other Central American woman than she did the other two.
And so what made it, what did you feel was undiscussable in that situation?
I didn't know how to even ask the question. Do you think it's because you're, all from different countries that that might be part of how you perceive people or how you want to treat people?
Mm-hmm. And so what may have been an option for you? How would you, now that we're just playing around, if I were that woman, what could you say to me now that might bring up that topic?
Maybe I could just say, like I noticed from the from the interviews I did with the people who work from you, that you all have different cultural backgrounds, and what do you notice about that?
Yes, because that's no judgment on your part. And
Right.
maybe perhaps to say, I noticed from the interviews that you have an array of different cultures here. How can those cultures support one another? Or how much do all of you know about each other's cultural backgrounds? Because then it could move into a team coaching situation where they share their cultural backgrounds, because I wouldn't think people would go home and read up on each other. But if they had a potluck or something where everybody is bringing grandmother's favorite dish that represented their culture, now you've got more of a level playing field, and you've got laughter, and you've got some building of community starting.
Great, thanks.
We have to use our creativity to open up the conversations around culture, because people act out of their cultural backgrounds, but they don't always project that that's where I'm coming from. It's just a part of who they are. But when that might rub up against a person from a different background, we as coaches might be a little bit more aware that it could be a possibility that they need some team building where they can share their thoughts about culture and how culture shapes some of the values that they bring to work.
Thanks, that's really helpful.
Okay, thank you. Is there anyone else? Hillary Joel. Hi, Hillary. You're on, Hillary. Does she have to, are we? Oh, I'm sorry. Hillary? Okay, Gina Lincoln. Lori, I'm going to ask you, do we have a problem with the muting and unmuting?
It looks like it. If people can unmute their phones, please, that would be helpful.
Yeah, unmute and be very, very respectful that we are 64 on the call. So Hillary or whomever had their hand up, let's go, because time is ticking.
Okay. Hillary, can you talk now?
Okay, I just was given a prompt to unmute. Sorry, I couldn't unmute before. Yes, I'll make it quick. Tamara, my kind of hard to approach issue is facilitating in a diverse room of young nonprofit managers. And I'm a white woman, and I have been told in the past that it's not fair, constructive, or appropriate to turn to the people of color in a room and ask them to explain how bias is affecting them in the workplace. It's like speak for their race, as the people who may have more advantage, people, whites, whatever, are trying to understand. So I'm on the side of demographic advantage, and I'm facilitating a room where a bunch of us, we all want to learn, and some of us feel like we need to turn to others to learn, but we don't want to burden them. They didn't sign up to teach.
Right, and I can tell you from experience, that can weigh on some people. One, not everybody wants to speak to a whole group. and we might assume that because you are of a certain demographic and people could learn from you, that person is okay putting their voice in the room. It could,
Right.
they could be sitting in their church group where everybody looks like them and still not want to put their voice in the room. So then when it's put upon them in the workplace, it becomes an extra burden. If you set the climate at the very beginning, that there are things that many of us don't know, and if there are people in the room who would like to contribute, in other words, you make it an open invitation without signaling people out. Or you do the groundwork in advance where you ask people, are you comfortable with me calling on you? And some people will say yes and appreciate the invitation, but very few want to be called upon in the moment, because we all know that there's no monolithic Black person who can speak for the entire group. And so people kind of backpedal on that, because that's how we used to have to be years of speaking, and you might have to work out in advance so that
Thank you.
and leave it more as an open invitation without signaling out any particular person.
The key distinction you made for me is create the open invitation well before specific questions come up, because I know it's inappropriate when they do come up, but to have set that stage earlier. Thank you.
And then there's some people who are going to sit back and have a wait and see how do you handle yourself.
Right.
Everybody doesn't always have your back.
Thanks.
That's the reality of things. All right. Anyone else from the chat, or should we just continue? All right. Who would like to share one of their I am poems with us? Raise your hand so we can see you. We've got 64 I am poems out there.
I don't see any hands raising, Tamara, but there are some amazing things here.
Okay, you want to pull, okay, Ramona French raised her hand. Ramona, welcome.
Okay, Ramona, you should be able to talk.
One of the things I wrote down, can you hear me?
Yes.
One of the things I wrote down, because this happens so often, is I am uncomfortable with using my voice in a world who does not see me. That just, I'm a manager in an environment around white males. That's, I go to the conference room and with the senior leaders, and they're all white males, and they don't see me at the table. But then I also wrote down is that I am no longer interested in living a comfortable life and I'm no longer living comfortably in an uncomfortable life. In my position as a manager, even though it's comfortable at that stage, I'm no longer comfortable with that as I ponder how I'm moving on to my retirement life, because I am capable and I am powerful and I am desirous of going after and leaving a legacy in where I work. So those are my I am statements.
Okay, thank you, Ramona, for bringing that up. I'm going to go back to where you said, I'm not seen.
Yes.
Ramona, what would it be like if you were seen? What would be different?
When I'm in a conference room and I make a statement, that the statement or one of my projects is acknowledged. It's more than once. It's only acknowledged when one of the other males in the room repeat that same statement. And then it's like, that's the first time they heard it. And I'm sitting there going, but I just said that. I mean, maybe the exact same words. Mm-hmm. And that happens a lot. So that's why I sometimes feel I'm not seen.
Okay. May I offer a little bit of insight here and maybe a suggestion?
Yes, ma'am.
That has happened to me. But when it happened to me earlier, I didn't have the level of maturity, and I'll call it my identity maturity. So I would just kind of sit back and feel myself get smaller.
Mm-hmm.
And then I had some really good Black women who were powerful at the top of the organization who saw me and pulled me aside and gave me a huge project, which they said this could be a career maker or career breaker. And I accepted the challenge, and everything worked out well. And it gave me a national reputation within my organization. But here's what I did when I got more confidence in my own sense of agency and personal power. And that is such an important point I'm going to make for everybody, no matter who you are. When you tap into your sense of personal power, then it's not, to me, it's not about whether they see me or not, but how I see myself. So I began to change. Remember, we talked in the beginning about the narratives and the personal stories that we create in our heads. I told myself a long time coming up that I couldn't sing. So all my life, I never sang publicly. I didn't sing in a choir. I had an embarrassing experience when I was in the 7th grade, when I volunteered to sing a solo at the mother-daughter tea. And I did not realize that I sounded like Alfalfa from the Little Rascals. In my head, I could sing. But when I tried out and the teacher accepted it, but she put a whole chorus of strong voices around me. And then the day of the mother-daughter tea, my mic was turned off. So I think the teacher thought she was being kind to me. She let me have the illusion that I could sing, but she had me drowned out. So from that point on, I just said, well, you can't sing. It was only 2 years ago, as I began with building my public speaking voice, that one day on stage, I just belted out part of a song. And I realized I didn't sound that bad because I'd been doing breathing exercises as a speaker. And what someone told me who was a singer, she said, it's not that you can't sing, you just don't know how to breathe. So I started working on the breathing. So the story was already planted in my head. So I'm going to bring this back to what you said. There is a book that really changed my life, and it's called Your Invisible Power. And I found that book in 1985 when we were going to Germany in a used bookstore. It's a little bitty pamphlet. It was 25 cents. I violated copyright. It was in the public domain. I made copies, gave it to all my friends. I will send a PDF in the materials here, but you can go on Amazon and buy it as a hardback little book. But in Your Invisible Power, the subtitle was Mastering the Art of Mental Science. Mastering the Art of Mental Science. And so it has a lot to do with the affirmations and the stories that we create in our minds. I have been able to achieve most things that I've done because I took the time to do the affirmations, to create the vision board, and to create a new story of who I am. When you create that new story, Ramona, which is you walk in and you just say in your head, everybody sees me. Everybody sees me. And so then when that happens to you, you raise your hand and say, excuse me, I just want to make an observation. And then use the skill of tracking. Tracking is when you start to notice who is speaking, how often they might speak. You can even think about what they're talking about, but you're tracking. In this sense, you're tracking when you could perceive that you are being ignored, or you are tracking the number of times you say something and there's no comment, or you say something and then the person repeats it. So now you can say, I've been tracking for the last few meetings, but particularly today, that when I make a statement, it's not embraced until someone else in the room repeats what I've said. I'm just checking. Has anyone else noticed that? And you don't say another word. Some may stumble and say, oh, and begin to explain. If they say nothing, then you just simply say, I just needed to check it, because the next time when I say something, I would like to feel acknowledged. The difference here is that someone told me a long time ago about conflict, whether it's external or internal, is that conflict happens when people don't fulfill a request that we never made. So based on your values, your upbringing, your training, your expectation of them is that they would do unto you as you would do unto them. In my growing phases, I realized that people were not socialized the way I had been socialized, especially around race and gender. So sometimes we have to call people's behavior in a very kind and respectful way, but very firm as well. So you might want to try that challenge of tracking when you say something, when it's ignored, when someone else says it, and then bring them back to center and remind them, you made that same point 15 minutes ago and there was no reaction. What's different now? You can even end it with a question.
Thank you.
Tamara, people are finding this extremely helpful, powerful. And there was one question about, can you repeat what you said about conflict, what conflict is?
Yes, conflict. When you fail to fulfill a request that I never made, when you fail to fulfill a request that I never made. So many times I have been on teams in situations when I was working where I just expected my manager to treat me a certain way. But I expected, well, with clients, we contract. So we make it clear. You know, when I was working with Terry, there was a contract. I'm gonna show up on time. Her clock's gonna start ticking whether, you know, I invested in her time. So we contract as coaches, but when we're in the workplace, we don't usually contract with our colleagues about how we want to be treated, what I need from you and what I'm willing to give to you, how we're gonna have a mutuality of support. We do it when we're lucky enough to have team building sessions, but on the day-to-day, we're doing the best that we can. And we're showing up at work and we're dealing with people. We don't know their stories. They don't know our stories. We might know they've got a kid who plays softball or their daughter graduated from college, but what do we know about the people that we work with? I sometimes, you know, in fact, I do one coaching session pro bono before I sign up with a client, because I want to know if there's chemistry there and if the person is even coachable. In all of my career, I refunded one person. I gave the money back. And it happened to be someone that I knew very well. But after a few sessions, I realized this is not working. I'm working too hard. This person is bouncing up against everything that I say. And then I realized she had violated, she didn't honor the agreement between us. If any of you have worked with or studied Peter Block and his book, Flawless Consulting, he goes through the consulting process. But one of the key things he talks about is contracting. And we don't contract with each other. And when I say that, I'm talking about in the workplace. If I'm going to work with another coach or another facilitator, we contract with one another. Is it okay if I interrupt you? There was contracting when Lori and I were planning this session. I needed to let her know that I'm an INTJ. What does that mean in doing something like this? I'm constantly tweaking up until 2 minutes before the webinar. But she understood that. And therefore, she's not stressing out that she doesn't have my PowerPoint on Friday, because the PowerPoint was really completed yesterday. But we contracted around that so there was no misunderstanding. Anyone else? Someone says, is there a possibility of using a headset? I'd have to go and get it.
You're fine now, Tamara. I can hear you clearly.
Linda Bidlack has raised her hand. Linda, can you come in?
Just a second.
Yes.
Hello, Tamara.
Hi, Linda. Welcome, welcome.
I am just loving this.
You're
And
right.
I am loving this.
You know what? Since you're on the line, can I tell a little bit of your story and our relationship?
Oh, sure.
Okay, Linda is one of those white people. When Black folks are talking together, you say, oh, that's a white woman who gets it. Linda was in my coaching roundtables on race and diversity a couple of years ago through the Georgetown program. And I had planned to do a series of 3, but because of my family situation, I'm a caregiver to my husband of 40 years. I couldn't continue. And Linda said, but we need more. And I said, well, why can't you do it? And what was your response, Linda?
We got 90 people into small groups who wanted to be in those kinds of circles that you started, Tamara.
Yes, yes. But remember, you said, I can't do that. And I said, it's very appropriate that you as a white woman should do this. And so I said, I will coach you and mentor you to facilitate some of those conversations. And then I said, even more than that, I will connect you with my friend Patty, who's
Yes.
a white woman in Seattle, and she's my thought partner.
Yes.
And you and Patty should talk. So all of you who are listening, I did what I could do with Linda with the time that I had, but then I also knew it would be good for her to talk to someone who was like her, another white woman. I don't know if you're Jewish or not, Linda, but Patty was Jewish. So I put them together to have a conversation about what did it mean to be a white woman being a champion around race and diversity. And then Linda just took the new normal and ran with it and made a success out of it. So I love to tell that story, Linda.
Oh, Tamara, thank you for using some of your precious time to share that. And I have been mentored by you and a number of Black men and women and other whites along the way. And it's I've learned that color blindness was the thing in the 70s.
Yes, yes.
It is no longer, and that we all want to be seen for all of who we are. But my question to you is, and I've certainly taken some risks and learned to ask a curious question when I'm paired with a client who's African American, or really any race now. I've learned to bring it into the first conversation and ask them about it.
Okay.
I'd love to hear your suggestions for how white people could open that conversation simply and gracefully.
I think the first thing is to tell a little bit of your own story. How you remember that the one question we started with was, And I wanted us to have time. I want all of you on the call to have time to think about this. And the question is, the powerful question for me is, how were you socialized around race before the age of 12? How were you socialized around race before the age of 12? And 12 is significant because up until about 12, we're really under the influence of whatever home we grew up in. We haven't gotten that middle school bug yet, although they started middle school a little bit earlier. But up until the age of 12, what did you hear around the dinner table? What conversations were around Thanksgiving or holiday time? And if people are honest, they will say that there were some things around race that were not that favorable. I had one friend, when I asked that question, he cried because he said, my grandfather was the Grand Wizard of the KKK outside of Philadelphia. And that was a shame and a burden that he hid from the rest of us. But because we were in a seminar and that question came out, he was able to unload that within the group and understand that no one was going to blame him or shame him because those were his roots. And that's what he was influenced by. But he also said when he walked home with his Black friend, there was a certain block where they had to split because they couldn't be seen together because of his family and his grandfather. So I think it goes back to the narratives that we share. So when there's a first coaching opportunity, I let people know what my background is. I always give them something similar, as I did today, about coming from the segregated South, being an eyewitness to the Watts Rebellion of 1965, and then being on this journey around peace building. And then I ask them to, and then I say, well, who are you? What is your story? And please make sure you integrate your race and gender in the story. And there's the invitation right there, because I modeled it.
That's very powerful. And when I have sat down, ever since you helped me start on this journey, when I sit down with a new client, I make sure sometime during that first hour to share how much I've learned from the small groups and reading African American history and discussing it in mixed race groups. And I feel like it's almost as if there's a blooming in the person that's sitting across from me, like, oh, it's okay to bring this into the conversation.
Yes.
I'm seen. Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you for raising your hand. I appreciate that. In the time that we do have together, I do want to hold up, and I'll put these in the list, but this one is called Courageous Conversations About Race. It's talking about, it's geared for people who are in schools, but I think it's good for everybody. And then there's so many conversations. Of course, all of you know about Crucial Conversations. Take it and put a race twist on it. And then also the Fierce Conversations. One book that I like is by Margaret Wheatley, and it's called Turning to One Another. And it's all about the power of conversation. But then also there's this book here called Black Scare. This is my book from my freshman year of college. And the subtitle here says, this is an account of the first white backlash in American history. It describes the responses of white racists to emancipation and Reconstruction, their misuse of science and the Bible, their fears of Negro domination, the political triumphs of these racist orators and pamphleteers were possible only because the vast majority of Americans believe the Negro to be innately inferior. So this is all about Black Reconstruction. The reason why I bring up a book like this is because the more you read a little bit about people who are different, the stronger you will be. This one I checked out of the library. and it's called Race Talk. Excellent, excellent book because it actually has conversations, and one chapter is called Color Blindness Means Color Mute. Color blindness means color mute. And so I started with that Apple commercial just to demonstrate that color is at the top of everybody's agenda these days, whether positive or negative. As coaches, I would suggest if you don't want to read the academic things, try fiction. Read a little bit of Toni Morrison and you'll learn a lot. Go back and look at James Baldwin, the movie that came out. I can't remember. I am the Negro or something like that. But James Baldwin, try to look at the poets. You can go back to some of the earlier poets, but particularly look at the work of W.E.B. Du Bois, because in 1902, he wrote The Souls of Black Folk. I have several copies in my house, but The Souls of Black Folk. And he says the problem of the 20th century is the problem of the color line. Well, now we're in the 21st century, and he's even more relevant now than he was then. He wrote a terrific study called The Philadelphia Negro, which changed the whole look of social science when it came to doing research on African Americans. One book that I particularly like and I love, and this was one of my heroes, Richard Beckhart. And I was on my way to an OD Network conference and we got the news that he had died. So I never got to meet him. But what I like about this book is that he chronicles his life as a change agent. And he talks about his life and his practice. I would encourage all of us to delve a little bit into reflective practice in terms of what got us here today and where do we need to grow in order to be of greater service to our clients. I know I stay in classes because there's just so much to learn even about myself. When I enrolled in George Mason in 2016, I was hit with my first class on conflict and race is that there's no such thing as race, that it is a social construct. And now I understand that. That's why I gave you the statement on race from the American Anthropological Association. And so we have all been saddled with this myth that we are very, very different. When really, when you go down to the DNA and you go down to the heart piece, we are more alike than we are different. And that is the message that I carry when I speak to audiences, no matter where I am. I'm always going for the heart piece, how we are more alike than we are different. I'm honored to be a coach because it gives me a platform to help people come in touch with their multiple identities. Their multiple identities. I'm going to just go back to the PowerPoint for just a moment.
And Tamara.
Yes.
There were just a couple of questions too, as we're kind of wrapping up that you might want to address or that actually you might be ready to do that as you're doing the ending here. But one was basically, why is this topic important and relevant to the practice of coaching?
Yes, it's important because one, companies are investing in us to help people who might be marginalized in their workplace. But how I can give you an example, this one Black manager, the people who were her direct reports did not respect her in her role. And she put it all on, it's because I'm Black, which is an easy fallback. And sometimes it is, but then you have to work around that. You can't just say, well, it's because I'm Black, this is happening. You have to look at, well, how am I showing up? And how am I challenging people who are disrespecting me in the workplace? When I am called in many times, it is to help people find their voice, to be able to stand in the fire with dignity and with a sense of resilience. So it's important to coaches to be able to help the whole person emerge in the workplace. I work now as a diversity consultant to a couple of organizations, and the one thing that comes up in two very different organizations is, how can I bring my whole self to work? And that means different things to different people. But who we are helps us to withstand stress and pressure. So it becomes a matter of well-being. Because when a person is having stress and trauma at work, and if race is a factor or gender is a factor, those are things that can't be changed. And so the coach can come in and helping a person to come up with tools and practices and greater self-awareness to be able to stand the way I suggested that Ramona stand. If you let yourself be a chopping block or somebody that people can just kick around, they'll continue to do it until you get so stressed out, you leave your good job. And some people, when we're coaching executives, they're in pretty high positions. And it's not necessarily true that they can walk out the door and get the same type of job with the same benefits. And, heaven forbid, they have a pre-existing condition. So I think that coaches come in as people who can help people not only survive in toxic workplaces, but to also thrive in those toxic workplaces. Because we help them to have greater awareness, going back to the coaching competencies. We help them to be able to ask the powerful questions too, like I suggested to Ramona. And we help them to have active listening skills, and we co-create with them the next actions that they might be able to take so that their workplace is more welcoming and they're not saddled with so much stress. So in many ways, I don't think I'm overspeaking when I say coaches can be lifesavers.
Thanks, Tamara. And I think there's one more that is interesting to address as well, and that is, should we share this story about race in a first conversation with the same race client?
Well, why not? Why not? Because I'm sure it has impacted both of you. So it depends on, you're starting where the client is, first of all. And this is when Linda and I were talking, we were talking about those introductory conversations. It doesn't matter who I'm talking with, they're gonna know who I am, where I come from, how I've been socialized, and what I bring to the coaching experience. So my background is part of my total package. You'll craft this intro. Now for me, it's second nature, but doing the I am poem will help you to get it short and succinct. Because that I am poem can be thematic as well.
Thanks, Tamara. And I'm just doing a time check. We have about 8 minutes left.
Okay. And they see on the screen, as we come down to these last minute, that there is a growing need for coaches who can address. I think I just sort of gone through the why. But that second bullet, the spiked increase in organizational trauma. Even after the shutdown, last night I heard the word trauma more than I've ever heard it on the news related to a workplace. So think about, you've already got issues in a workplace that your client is dealing with. Now you add on the aftermath of the shutdown. And even if some of your clients were directly affected, they may have been indirectly affected. And so therefore, the more that we can show up helping clients to find out the direction that they want to go to become whole and productive, then the better we will be of service to them. And if race is a factor, sometimes they'll say it's not, that's okay. It's not something that you push. It's something that you are aware of, that it's always there in the background. Are there any other questions or comments?
There are tons of comments and tons of resources that are being shared within the chat box. One of the things that I am certainly attempting to do before we close out the webinar is to see if I can't capture all of them so that we can share them with all of you. But there are no hands raised and just lots of wonderful exchange.
Okay. Well, I'm going to, as we wind down, because it's very important for us to end on time, some of you might be saying, well, how can I experience more of this? I hold what I call learning labs, and Linda, it's in the same place that I did the coaches roundtables. I'm a member of the Women's National Democratic Club. Some of you may know that old mansion sitting there at 1526 New Hampshire Avenue. That's where I am a staple in that club. We do speaker series throughout the year, and so I think I'll be coming up on a speech probably sometime in April or May, and Lori has your information, and I hope we'll send that out. If you want to come, all you do is pay for lunch that day, and I'll probably be speaking on a similar topic. I also hold learning labs every other month over there, and it starts just like our coaches roundtable. People come in and we have conversation between 10 and 12, and then from 12 to 1 we have a lovely served meal, and then we break at 2. And that goes back into the old school in the 20s when they used to do the salons where people came together around different topics. My topics are always around conflict, race, and diversity. And so those are held at the Women's National Democratic Club. And just a plug for my website, if you do want more information to follow what I'm doing or get some of these tips, I do write a blog, and I have it centering on this topic going forward. And it comes out maybe twice a month, but if you want that, it's on the, you go to my website and you sign up, okay? I don't have any of your contact information, and that's by design. All of your contact information stays with the ICF. It's only if you come and sign up at my website. And you see here, my contact information is there. And those are the 2 sessions that are coming up next. And it's limited to 14 people. Now, I could do things that are much bigger, but because I'm at a season in my life where I'm really trying to get to the root of the root and working with people, I don't do large things unless I'm doing it as part of a sponsorship with an organization. So I keep these very small, and then we're able to have really authentic conversations, kind of like what we tried to do today, but more voices can get in the room.
Thank you so much, Tamara, for everything. I think it's been a very eye-opening, possibly even soul-searching time for all of us. And thank you, everyone, for your interaction and your comments in the chat box and your questions. Tamara, there's lots of comments and love for you that are coming through on the chat box, so thank you very much. Thank you, everyone, for joining us this morning. Please feel free to go on the ICF Maryland website to see the other resources and offerings that we will be sharing with all of you during 2019. We do have our next program is on February 8th from 8:30 to 10. It is at UMBC Training Center. It is one of our business development sessions, and it's titled Talk Yourself into Success to Get the Outcome That You Desire. So you will be receiving an email from ICF Maryland with an evaluation, with the CCE information. And we'll also send information that Tamara said that she'll be sharing with me, some of the resources and books that, that she has talked about. So again, thank you so much, and have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful snowy day if you're in DC.
Bye, Tamara.
Thank you, Lori.